Um, is there anybody else who's going to be here? Because I think Kevin's not, and Dan's traveling, and Jonathan's
canceled. Out. Yeah. Maybe Gretchen.
Oh yeah.
So I think it might be the three of us for a few minutes.
Otherwise, maybe she doesn't show up. I don't know.
Yeah, we could. There's probably not a whole lot to synchronously discuss if there's not various parties here.
How is everything going with both the database monitoring stuff and the file storage thing?
It's going along yesterday. I'm trying to remember. Yesterday was really my first day of this week to be back on board, just because I've had a bunch of personal stuff going on.
Okay.
But it was really my first. I think today was the first time in a while I picked up the routes thing. Your review is really good. You definitely pointed me in the right direction on a lot of the different things I was doing. I've just got to the point, where I've sort of taken the stupid file storage method is probably close to as far as it can go. So I think, literally just 10 minutes ago, I did some commits.
I saw that you pushed some commits. I haven't looked at them. So
yeah. You're not real-time monitoring all PRs.
Well, I try not to look at everything that somebody pushes because it might just be work in progress.
Doodling. Yeah. It's just now that I've sort of taken this to its logical conclusion, or pretty close to, I can see the weakness of it, and definitely how crazy what I was doing with just fetching basically anything was before. So now I at least have a little bit of I've got sort of a try catch block for try to do internal storage that's configured, but if they don't match up, like in dev where you're local, but you imported all this stuff and nothing is local, if that doesn't line up, check and see if it's a public archive host, and then if it is, go ahead and try to fetch it. But that's kind of an ugly way to do it.
It feels to me like my first thought would be you should flip that around and just check if it's a public archive host, and if it is, then just redirect to there.
Yeah, that is actually what's happening.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote the stuff in the archiver module to basically handle all the cases, and then in the view controller, or in the controller, I'm actually short circuiting that. So that's because I decided, initially I just did it where we were redirecting or serving the local thing, but then whenever I turned off the redirect, we couldn't always proxy it. Like in this case, specifically in dev, this would not have happened in production, but specifically in dev where the stuff is actually out on the internet, but we have everything configured for local. But I was thinking about also in other circumstances, if we changed our configure.
Well, even in local though, if you wound up having downloaded the file, shouldn't the URL or URI field for the version be pointing to your local one?
Yes, it doesn't work that way when you seed stuff.
Right, but when you seed, you never download anything. That's why seeding's set up that way, so that it doesn't take an hour.
Yes, yeah, exactly. No, this is literally whenever the thing that made me go, maybe I should try doing a little more was whenever I tried proxying something from seed, it was trying to serve a local file that was the local file path followed by a URI.
Oh, okay.
So because I wasn't initially doing any check to see what the thing was at all.
Right, because Archiver sort of does a funny thing where it says if it's a public thing, then sure, it's archived. I have it. It doesn't differentiate between it's archived and I have archived it.
Right. Well, and this is where, so what I have is sort of a dumb hack to just work around that. But I can see where like actually making it not so dumb, would be better. Anyway, so like I just got to that. Now I'm looking at it going, gosh, it's almost like Rob has like worked on this thing and thought about it.
I mean, I tried to set up that stuff so it wasn't just in. You could also pull back out with the idea that you just write all the control things around that logic ultimately.
Yeah. So it's probably like I've dealt with some of this, like some of the really glaring stuff. It's less sketch-like. It might be worth your time to look at it, or maybe I can let it sit for a day and see if there's anything I'm sort of like. Again, to me, there is a big question of, is this reasonable at all, or should we just go, no, let's just do it the smart way.
Okay. Well, I mean, just let me know when you want to look at it, and let me know if you're hitting a wall on that or anything else.
Yeah. It was a really fun. Yeah, I guess we are. I guess this is it because Gretchen's not. Oh, there's Gretchen.
Hey, sorry. Gretchen.
You're in a little window. I don't have all my displays today, so. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and jump into actual things, and that was nothing, but so Gretchen, what is this Mark Graham question? I don't have context.
I have no idea either. He sent me 3 like seemingly urgent emails in one day, the day that I was traveling, of like, can we talk about Edgy WebMonitor or Edgy Internet Archive or Wayback Machine collaboration? Like, did you see my email? Did you see my email? Like, are you the best person to contact? And I have no idea what it's about. We're talking tomorrow. But I do wonder if I'm the appropriate person to be talking with him at all. Cause I don't really, I don't know what to anticipate, but I guess I'm glad that you posted links to this GitHub, Rob, because I think this will help me, because I know theoretically about the challenges involved, but actually having some specifics to draw upon of like what are the challenges, I think would be useful to have in hand. So thanks for that. And I guess the other question is like, if he's pitching some sort of like larger collaboration, like, are we interested?
This is the first I've heard of it.
Me too.
I mean, he messages me on Slack every so often with things, but I don't know what this would have been about. I think we'd be interested, but I also feel like I'd need to know more. I mean, so like the concern for me is that like that's a great relationship to have. I don't want to screw that relationship, and I also want to make sure it keeps happening. But like the flip side is like our slow realization over time is that being able to get all the information out of the archive is hard to do reliably. In fact, it's impossible to do completely. So made some big improvements over that I linked, which I think is the link you were referring to. But it's still like 10% of mementos are just unplaybackable, period, for one reason or another. And so the reality is like, we're never going to get to 100% anytime soon. And I worry, and I also know that to the degree that we want to be able to do more things like mapping sites and stuff that requires an approach that's not just scrape this list of pages, the way the archive is set up is just not a way to do that. Like there's no, we don't have a good window into how they crawl. We know there's a lot of problems with how they crawl based on the stuff we see in CDX that we have to filter out. so it's hard for us to say in a meaningful way that then we can back up in our reports and research how robust is a map that we build of a site based off Internet Archive. And it's also like even if we felt like what they had was robust in that sense, or complete, I guess is a better word in that sense, there's no good tools for like getting that information out, right? Like we can say over a given time period, give us all the snapshots, and then we can try and download all those snapshots. We also like can't just get metadata, which is what we would want for mapping. We have to actually download the snapshot to get the metadata, because what you get in the CDX listing is like this much of the picture, and there's a giant block of metadata that comes at the front of a version or a snapshot when you download that snapshot, or memento in Internet Archive parlance or Wayback parlance. So if you're looking at that thread, the term is memento, and memento is a snapshot of a page. But the front part of the memento has like a giant pile of very useful metadata that we need. And even then, there's still some metadata missing that's important to us, like what's the chain of redirects that happens. So like if I know this URL exists in the map, but it's not real in the sense of like being a page. This is just actually pointing to this other page, and this other URL also points to that, right? So we need to be able to say like all these are like nice front doors to the only one that actually exists, which is here. And no part of the archive will give you that information. You have to piece it together. So basically for us to build a map, we still have to request the entirety of that website and every snapshot of that website over the given period of time. So it's really hard to pull out of the archive a sense of like a map, even if we felt like what they had crawled was complete and we knew enough about it to like say in a researchy way like why we believe that it's complete. So there are like all those issues with the archive or with Wayback. From the perspective of like continuing what we are doing now with like, we just have these pages we're tracking and we just want snapshots and versions of those pages. We can mostly do that with the exception of the concerns about like how many failed to play back. There's another issue tied in there, which is some of the things that aren't playbackable aren't actual snapshots. So it's also like, I can't give you I don't have a great way to say that in a computational sense. So I can't give you how much of that 10% is like, it's just not real versus how much of that 10% is it just won't play back. So there's also that problem. So it's, to talk about the not real case slightly more, just so it doesn't sound super scary. What tends to happen in the archive is because they have a sense of like the URL for a page, and then they have a cert key or a cert URL, SURT, which is basically like a rejiggered version of the URL that attempts to say, all these different URLs are basically the same. So it's like a canonical form of the URL. But the reality is there are very few things in a URL that are technically malleable, but lots of things in a URL that are malleable in practice on most websites. So CERT takes all the things that are technically malleable and normalizes them to a form. But then it goes farther in order to make the archive useful and says all these other things that are probably equivalent in practice, I'm going to treat as equivalent. That is not always accurate, but it's like a best effort, right? It's their best balance between like correct and where like what amount of incorrect is acceptable in order to be most useful, right? So that you're not taking the same page and splitting it out into 10 different conceptual pages. So it's their like best middle ground, and which is super useful for a person who's trying to browse the history of a web page. It's middlingly, it's somewhere between useful and frustrating if you're trying to put together like a accurate research-wise picture, because there's no way to reliably get the archive to treat those things differently. It will like also give you URL information, but the problem is when you go to ask for a memento, it's always going to go back to what's the CERT version. And so some of the mementos that won't play back are because it never got stored because there was a nearby CERT snapshot that was nearby enough for it to say, this other thing that we got 2 seconds later is the same, or probably the same.
Okay.
So there will be CDX, which is the thing that says like you can search it for a time frame and a number of listings, and then we use that to actually go get the mementos. CDX will list everything that the archive ever like queued up and tried, including URLs that are nonsense, that aren't actual URLs, but also including things like there will be https:// and http://www.epa.gov. And happily, like those are both the same thing, and sort of treats them both the same. And what you'll have when you have two of those right near each other is very frequently when you ask for one, the archive will say, nope, that's the same as this other one. And so it tells you that in a way that's not like it's the same. It's like you should just go look at this other one. And we can't differentiate, but not in a meaningful way, between that and the situation where one of those listings just literally is not playbackable. And we also can't differentiate between when it did that and that was a correct thing, like HTTP EPA.gov versus HTTPS EPA.gov, and when it did that incorrectly because those two URLs are the same CERT URL, but they're a different page. That's rare, but it does happen, right? So we have all those things happening at once in Wayback, which is where it gets fuzzy, and where I can't tell you the difference between like how much of that 10% is really not playbackable versus how much is like real versus how much is like things getting conflated, and you know it all kind of comes back to this sense of like as I have dealt more and more with Wayback, it is clearer and clearer the ways in which it is. Everything about it is designed for a person browsing the history of a web page and not for trying to put together larger analyses or research or like get a clear sort of like analyzable picture of things. So a lot of APIs that would make that sort of stuff easier don't exist or are undercut by fundamental designs that are around, like making it human browsable, making it very nice to browse as a human. So like that's like the feelingsy like broad scope version of like what's worked well and not worked well with the archive. Hopefully that informs like why like I think the archive's great, but also like we have our issues with it and what we need to think about in any sort of partnership or continuing to work with them or working closer with them.
Definitely. That's super helpful. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you. That's
Let's see, and Rob and I kind of already chatted about some of the stuff I've been doing. Is there anything else, Gretchen, that you wanted to bring to the group? I think Rob and I have talked through things that were useful for me to talk through. Rob, is there anything that you need feedback from that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I got in late and didn't fully fill out these notes. The thing that I need feedback on, I also posted in Slack the other day about the issue with pages moving. So just to call that out here, we, long ago, when we set up the database, we gave pages, our concept of a page, we gave them unique identifiers that were not their URL, because we had this idea that a page might exist at multiple locations because of redirects, or it might move through time. Both situations we have seen. And we wanted our concept of page to be able to handle all of that, rather than just being like a URL. But at the same time that we did that, in order to make it possible, we also punted on how to model that situation where a page has multiple URLs or multiple URLs over time. And so in practice, there's no difference between a page and a URL right now. And the thing we're getting to this point where we're seeing more and more of pages moving. The thing that raised this for me this past week is just that there's a domain that went offline completely. I forget what it was, but it's in that issue. We're only tracking 3 pages at it, so it's not a huge deal. But basically, those pages have been redirecting to the new domain. They exist at the new domain. They've been doing that for months at least, possibly much longer. I'm not sure how long they've, like, my first reaction was like, oh no, did they just take this thing down with like no warning? And then like going back and looking, I'm like, oh, they've been redirecting for a long time. Like they've actually done, if they're going to retire a domain, they've done like a good practice of like, everything is moving here. We've been redirecting everything here for like months or maybe a year. Like they've done all the right things around it. Our poor modeling of that situation caused us not to see that situation, caused us not to account for it. So the reason it raised it for me is because we now have a few pages we track that are we can't track them anymore because the URL we have for them no longer exists, and we don't have a way to model that they moved. So the question I asked that has an issue that needs feedback was my proposal for a quick and dirty solution is to add a freeform text notes field to page records, so we can shove the old URL in there and update the URL to the new URL. The real question embedded in there is that a good short-term solution that we should enact now? Or should we say, nope, we need to actually come up with a real answer about how to model the situation correctly and do that? So that's all. How much of an emergency is it, I guess?
So I apologize, that sat there since, I think it was late last week that you posted that, or sometime last week.
I would have been either late last week or over the weekend.
I've been crawling out a little bit of a hole with things that you've asked for feedback with, so I do apologize. But yeah, just my gut check on it is that, right now it's a relatively small problem, but I do think it would be good to account for it before it becomes a big blind spot for us, or one that we have to then go back and do a bunch of retroactive fixing if we want analysts to be able to compare versions, right? It seems like we might be able to. Well, I'll look at it and do feedback today, basically before the day's out. At sort of what that solution is. My feeling is that we could probably do something a little less quick and dirty and still do it relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. But I'd have to think about what that is.
Yeah, I think there are some still slightly fuzzy on exactly what they should be, but like two alternative solutions in my head is like another, like we get rid of the URL fields on a page, or maybe we keep it as like current URL, but it's not really the main thing you should be referencing, and have a foreign table that is the list of URLs and they have time periods attached to them. The alternative is like maybe a JSON array, JSONB. Like that might just be more compact and straightforward rather than like trying to do a whole relationship between tables. I'm not really sure like which one makes more sense in this particular scenario.
Yeah. Those both sound reasonable, like from just on the surface. So yeah, I like that idea of, just basically having a latest reference and then your list of things instead of the one thing.
Would that be possible then to, if doing it that way, to compare the newly directed page to the old page? Because that would be really useful. I've just started working on the what will be a public comment on the proposed new Waters of the United States rule, and which was, there was the Obama era Clean Water rule, and then they repealed that, and are now doing kind of a new version of the WOTUS rule. But in 2017, they redirected all of the Clean Water rule pages to just like a single WOTUS rule splash page, which has like much less information. But it'd be really nice to be able to give a visual, like a screenshot of that, of just to demonstrate the difference in the information there.
Yeah, I think state local climate, state local energy is another like great example.
Yeah.
Like if we could go back and reify where we now have multiple records that should be unified as one using this mechanism, like that would be hugely useful.
Yeah.
To be able to show like the changes there more clearly. That way you don't have this disconnect between the two for the pages that we know existed in both. You can actually, see what they look like.
And that actually might be a kind of a link to some of the things we talked about at the annual meeting of like, maybe in the future we want to be comparing the way information is presented in Sweden versus the United States. And if you were able to kind of select, I want to compare these two pages, even if, instead of like different versions of the same page, if you want to compare these two pages, I don't know if that would be feasible. If that would be an avenue for that.
I think so. Like on the one hand, all our tooling is set up to make that, from a technical perspective, super easy to do, or not hard. It's set up to make that very, very possible. The flip side is I don't know what a remotely sane way to like shoehorn that into our user interfaces. But this is also like one of the reasons the user interface is its own project. And the fact that it's UI is really a misnomer. It should be like analyst UI or something. Because the idea was like, if we wanted to do different takes on what your working task is, you could build different interfaces onto the data. And so everything is an API and tools. And like when you ask for a diff, you can always just say, at the end of the day, you're saying, give me a diff of these two URLs. We just set it up so that the one that's easy to ask for is, I have this page, and give me the diff between these two versions of it. And what actually happens under the hood is it goes and looks up the URLs for where we stored the two versions and then sends those to the diffing API call. But you could always go directly to the diffing call and be like, nah, I got these two totally divergent things that I want to compare. So like all the stuff to make that straightforward has been built in order to make that straightforward. The question is just like, would it even make sense? And if so, how would you put that into our current UI? Or is that just a different UI that you would build? And it's set up so that it should be straightforward to build that different UI. Just somebody would have to put in the effort to do it.
Well, I'll say too that the other thing, so we could very easily, I'm not going to say very easily. It's definitely feasible to have those diffs of two totally different things, but writing the differ instance to give you a semantically useful comparison of those two things would be challenging. Like these are two totally different pages that are about two different countries' policy on the same subject matter. Right now, all of our diffs would basically be like, yep, everything is different about the two of them. So I think that's where it would be challenging, was writing a semantically useful diff between those two things. Yeah,
I mean, I'm not sure if there's any, depending how different those pages are, like if you're really trying to compare like EPA's page about some subject matter to like whatever the equivalent like ministry in Sweden is about that subject matter, like I'm not sure there's any mechanistic way to give you something useful. But if there are things that are potentially closer, like maybe there is. So I don't know. Like that is a good point. That's the question you have to answer first, is like, how divergent are the things you're trying to compare? Because what you may really want to do is just need a human to look at the two and talk about what's different.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah.
I think it's a great concept. As you said, like the UI here sounds like the capacity to annotate, like, hey, here's a point of comparison URL. For a human, is like the annotation side of that might be really, really helpful. From the mechanical perspective, I think if you sort of zoom out from the web monitoring project, you guys have established some really great heuristics for like, what is a significant indicator? What does significant change look like on the analyst side of things, or sort of on the like, it's a lot of the work that Eric and the sort of more data-driven analysis is doing. So if you could eventually establish heuristics for defining, okay, this section of a website represents Sweden's description of climate modeling, and here's the volume of information and the frequency with which it's changing. And then here's the volume of information and the frequency with which the US is changing. And like that sort of like keywords being removed, keywords into like, one nice thing is when you get the web monitoring project really lays some foundations for statistical analysis across things that would normally not establish ontologies of comparison. And so you really have a lot of, there's a lot of building to get to that at both a very high level, but also at a very like analyst level, sort of like specific feature set. So obviously, as this points to, it's just like, yay, if we had infinite resources and more work, we could do really cool stuff. But I just think it'd be worth like signposting I think that's where that gets.
Sorry, I'm trying to take notes of what everybody's talking about, including myself. That was a really interesting question, Gretchen. Does anybody have any other things to bring up on the dev thing? We're 4 minutes after, or do we want to move on to other stuff?
I know we're trying to get away from progress reporting, and because I got in here late, I haven't fully filled out the doc. So I just wanted to note that I got incident reports done for the 2 failures over the last couple of weeks. Yeah, and I think, Jason, you took a look at and reviewed that the PR for the fix to Versionista, that I guess it should just merge in and separate out the work for cleaning it up nicer. Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, because it just leaves all the old stuff behind. It just returns early before anything can run.
Yeah, I think that's actually nice, since it's like pretty preliminary and we don't know what's going to happen next. Like that's sort of the nature. That's the nature of Versionista, right?
Yeah.
So I was hoping that we might hear back from the person that reported the issue, which is why I just sort of like left it at commentary. But
yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping to, but now it's been like almost a week, and so I don't think there's any reason to wait for it. But
it's obviously working for us now, so
yeah. That's all I got.
Okay. Well, so we had on the agenda for a cross-team meeting. We don't have a full team in on the dev side, obviously, but so we could just skip right over meet and greet with Jonathan since he's not here. But we could notes. Oh, yes. It should be in the announcement, but I'll just drop it. Let me drop you that link.
I'm assuming they are. I have like 19 things going on.
Yep. I understand.
Finding the right Slack channel is shorter than asking someone to copy it.
Yep.
I got
That's
it.
fine. Here you go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm going to jump out at this point of sort of leading just so I can take notes because I'm a little bit backed up there.
Okay. So yeah, is there anything worth discussing about JV's work and whether Jonathan might be able to continue it or whatever, since Jonathan's not here.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I'm on shoddy internet.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have like a link
Kelsey, can you kill video?
that we?
Yeah, you're breaking up now.
You worked just long enough to tell us, does this work? And then it stopped working.
Do you want to maybe kill video and try again, Kelsey?
I put it in the chat.
Yes, I think there is a specific, she maintained everything in a repo on Edgy Gov Data Archiving, I think. Compute Canada. Oh no, I will find it. But yeah, there's something that she's doing some ops infrastructure work. I don't know where it is, but I will find it.
Okay, I added an action items section at the bottom of Cross Team with that for you, Brendan. So
I'm trying to find it now.
Yeah. So I think the next thing here is the question of, should we make Kelsey an owner on the Edgy GitHub org? I don't see any real concerns with that. If nobody else does, I'm not sure whether there's somebody who's not on this call, who's a stakeholder who needs to know that that might be happening.
The only person I can think of that might want to know would be Jonathan, but I think we can just tell him that that happens. Like if he starts taking more of a security and access concern over our code repos, but.
Okay. So I guess I'll just be responsible for that since I think I'm already an owner on the org, so I can make that happen. I'll check with Jonathan and then do that. Just the other thing. And so Kevin also had a point about there's a PR about having a core set of labels across projects. And I think he just wanted to raise that so people are aware of it, because I wasn't aware of it. But I don't know if anybody wants to take a quick skim on that and has thoughts, or if we should just hold that for a later asynchronous discussion.
That's something I'd be happy to post my thoughts on later today, just in the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually at Query, there's like an NPM package that is just like sync labels, and you give it a JSON file. I use this thing all the time. I'm going to try and put the shell script I run in a gist for you, see if it's helpful. But it's super helpful because you just run it across all the repos and then just make sure all your labels are there. It doesn't actually label issues for you, obviously.
Yeah, that would probably be super useful to have. I've seen scripts like that in other orgs with lots of repos, so it's a good idea. Something we have not done well. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to raise? Because I think that's the end of the pre-planned agenda here for Cross Team.
Go ahead.
Kelsey, I just saw that Kelsey posted, she'd love comments about, on that PR, maybe I'm misunderstanding what she wrote. Are you asking about that milestone as a whole, Kelsey?
We'll try audio again, see how this does. The proposal in the labels issue.
Okay, can you give us a review on that? I think I missed it. Or you just mean the labels that are proposed there? Okay, does anybody else know if there's a specific proposal in that issue she's asking about, or if it's just the labels that are proposed in that issue?
I'm taking a look.
Okay.
There's a link in chat. Yeah, she's actually proposed the labels to use.
Okay,
Great.
I guess that's just what I thought of.
Yeah, that's the thing we
Okay.
want to get an up down on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super confused. All right, so I think we're good there. People are going to look at that. All right. Right. So Brendan, you had something else.
Yeah, I just posted a link to that gist of the label creation for creating labels. I'm just adding this to the issue really quick. Label. No, I think there's a number of other things we could chat about. We could use this time, 10, 15 minutes. And I just wanted to sort of put that on the table. While we were here, I was like side quest working on recording redirects, writing a unit test that records redirects in walk, just because I figured that seemed like the one thing that's really outstanding from being useful. But yeah, anything we want to surface there in terms of cross-team stuff?
How I'm curious when you're recording them. Is that a change in general or specifically for the map, for the site map?
It would be to both. It would just be an architectural change to making sure that we aligned with what you posted in the issue of having everything at least be able to construct the chain of redirects from this page was redirected to from here, and this page I went to this URL and it told me to go there. No body, just where the redirect is supposed to go. Just basically getting a unit test up for that.
Cool.
Making sure that that's actually provably working, because I think one of the issues we ran into is I thought that was, and then it wasn't written, so I was like, okay, let's write a test, and that's what they're there for.
Are you modeling that on like both sides of the relationship, or just one? Like, is the page that redirects listing where it ultimately goes, or is it the opposite way, or both?
I think it should be both. I think it should be possible to do both, and if we hadn't configure it differently, but I think it should be both, because you never know which end of the redirect you're going to arrive from, right? Like if you're going backwards in time or backwards in redirects, then you need to be able to traverse that way, but you also need to be able to traverse forwards.
Yeah,
so
that sounds great.
They're not version histories. They are in fact bidirectional links. And so,
that sounds wonderful. Then you don't have to analyze the whole set to go the right.
Yeah, and I really like the phrasing that you guys are arriving at toward the end of that web monitoring, the meeting we just seamlessly left, of the like geared towards analysis, really like, and I think that's part of what it's the first time I've heard that language come up, and it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that sort of has been gnawing at me with the walk side of things is we actually inherited some of the IA thinking around like organizing crawls in terms of like silos of crawled information. And I think that the more I think about it, the more I think that's actually really not a good way to go about this. And thinking more in terms of like the way that web thinks, which is a database of a large table of which is a time series database. Basically, what URL did you hit at what point? What happened at that time? And have it be a sequential append-only log in essence of what was done. Whereas, like, I think the IA sort of tends to think in terms of like blobs of resources associated in these large colorimetric sort of like raw data formats, which I think is creating a lot of the problems, right? Because like as we think about this, like how do I access do I query against that? How do I analyze sort of like a canonicalized like CDXJ type thing? The seam of, do I put the metadata in the work file? Do I put the metadata in this CDXJ record? Like all this starts to get like a little bit hairy. And because now you introduce the added layer of complexity of like, are we talking about this crawl or this crawl at this point in time? Like this like siloing actually, I think really works against us. And it seems like it would be better to organize it in terms of, at this point in time, this URL was hit. Here is all the metadata from that response. The raw data is stored separately. And like, does that strike you as, that's where my brain's sort of leading. It's a very centralized way of thinking about things, but.
So I think, so yes and no. So I think looking at it as a more of like everything over time presentation is what CDX tries to do at Wayback. And it does do a good job of that. It just does a problematic job of presenting you enough metadata in the right places.
Yeah, see, that's where I kind of disagree, right? Like, I don't think the CDX thing is doing the right job. I think it's the cert form and the decisions about metadata truncation are really hurting things.
Oh, totally.
Lookup times hurt. Architecturally, it means that you're doing lookups into 30 gig byte files, byte slice files, and that's where we're getting this latency.
Sorry. I should clarify that I'm saying from the API perspective, so from the outside in perspective, not from the inside out, like how it works perspective.
Perfect. Yeah.
I agree with you from the inside out perspective, because CDX is trying to present an API where it's just a unified everything. It's just limited the amount of metadata it will give you, because CDX is running off of an index that they build in a Hadoop cluster that regularly goes down. It's just fun to watch, of all their different work crawls, which has only recently become clear to me how piecemeal that is all over the place, through asking them a bunch of questions. But the CDX API does try and present everything, because one thing I discovered when talking with them recently was like, with all the problems we've been encountering with our approach to trying to get stuff out, which is to query CDX and then ask for mementos based on CDX and then build up a picture based on that. I asked them, like, if there's I know one place where I can see a list of works, like, should I just be downloading works and reading works? Would that be more reliable and better? And they were like, oh no, actually that's not everything. And there's a whole bunch of stuff CDX presents in the mixed bag of all the stuff that nobody can get the work publicly. The only way is through CDX and Memento. So you're doing the right thing, because that's the only complete representation that's publicly available. So, I mean, the interface is trying to present is the one that matches what you're saying. It's just super messy under the hood. And I think that aspect of it is useful, but I wouldn't want to lose the aspect of, like, here is a crawl, because I think we need that in order to be able to say something meaningful about, like, mapping a site at any given point in time. I mean, as long as work is also, like, outputting a map when it does a crawl, like, maybe that's not as true. We can just hold on to the map. But if you wanted to reverse engineer that map later, then you would need some way to say, like, here's the list of all the records that were in a particular crawl. Like, even if what that is really just sort of an index into the bigger pile, I would still want to have that information around somewhere, like, for that reason, right? To be able to say, like, here's what we thought was complete at a given slice of time where we tried to get stuff.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Continuous. Yeah.
But I've been thinking, like, just in some initial tests, and I think that I sort of went back to walk and looked at it. It was like, this is going to cause problems when we start to get into, like, thousands of crawls when we've run. And so I think it would be smarter to sort of conceive of this as associating each response, adding a crawl ID. So this is the process ID that was coordinating this, and then having a worker ID that actually executed the thing, which I think, based on the architecture that we worked out a little while ago, would make a lot of sense given that we would want to be able to swap the type of worker. And so if we had this headless Chrome worker that can do that could identify different things, it would sort of have a different identifier, and it would say, oh, you're getting a different sort of fidelity of information because it went to the fancy worker and not to the stupid go fetch URL worker. But I think that to me, modeling it in the inverse of what IA has been doing and thinking first about the index and second about the bytes makes a lot of sense for the secondary reason of now, once we have the thing that we showed up to the Internet Archive API, I can remember when Dan and I sort of sat down and first said, we can get this out of the IA. And we're like, raw data, like this question of where is the raw information, right? And I think the other thing that the metadata is doing to the storage of this information is breaking its hashability. And so if we put metadata into the bytes and we attach the body and then we jam that as a file in, we're now, if the body's the same, we're not getting the capacity to hash that because the timestamp's always going to break the hash. And so if we just tore the two apart and said, this is a large and everything we know with an ID associated with what crawl generated with it attached as metadata. And we had just a pointer to this result did in fact have a body. It returned us a response. Here's the hash of body. We would now get a sort of much better deduplication factor across the actual raw content that we're archiving, and also have the advantage of a fast lookup database that could finally serve us some analysis where we can do querying that we couldn't do because you can't ask a CDXJ for filter according to this and please aggregate a pivot table based on everything that returned me. Give me every response code organized by the last week, right? And being able to say, I want to know how many redirects did we get last week, and that's a question that we should be able to ask consistently.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry, Jason. Did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to pop in there and say I think we don't know all of the underlying infrastructure things happening at Internet Archive with the Wayback infrastructure. But I mean, I think it seems like that they do themselves have some trouble with the scale of the things that we would like to do. I mean, so there is an argument there of rethinking what's first and second class internally, at least, with the idea that you might want this to do a very large number of things, and then working backwards from there. I do. That sounds good to me.
Yeah. So the thing I was going to add to that is that I think, from my perspective, the way I think this should be stored is we should store keyed by hash the body bytes, and we should store keyed by hash a metadata document. And then we should also have our index that has all the metadata in it. But I want to store those metadata documents separately somewhere also, so that the day that we say, for now we're going to use Postgres because that can actually scale a lot farther than you would think, and it gives us a lot of flexibility. But in the future, when we realize we've done so much that we're killing Postgres, we can go back to the documents of the metadata and compose something in Hadoop or something in some system or whatever, right? Or we have a raw pile of the metadata that is not we don't have to painfully extract it back out from Postgres.
Yeah, no, deep agreement there. I think that's the way to go. Basically, we've reinvented C++ header files and body files, right? It's
yes, pretty much.
But I think to me, that alone sort of revitalizes some interest in this. I think it's been interesting to see how much all of the distributed system thinking, IPFS stuff, and that was really sort of I think a bit of a mental block pushing toward this idea of siloed archives, right? I want to do a single crawl and create the hash of the crawl and then move the calls around and it'll behave like IA. But I think the problem set that web monitoring presents is from an analysis perspective, it's just no, we want to do rich analysis. We want to collect a rich pile of information that aggregates quickly and that has the capacity to do high fidelity only when we want it, right? So that index should be much, much faster to talk to. and should be much, much more flexible in terms of what kind of questions we should ask it. And then it should be able to give us, cool, now that I've gotten down to a reasonable amount of stuff, I can start to say, give me the raw data, start giving me raw information, and including raw headers for anything that we missed. And yeah, but yeah, to me that feels, I'm glad that we put Badger into Walk a little while ago, because I think we can experiment there as a starting point. You can't do funny querying stuff, but that's a very short, it's just a shorter distance set of changes. But yeah, I think that for a while it's been a little bit like, okay, is it this, do we do this just because the IA doesn't currently meet performance needs, and like, or do we do this because this is like kind of a fundamentally different use case for archiving versus the sort of like classic work in terms of crawls. And I don't know if I wouldn't, my opinion is that it is because of the analysis that one is trying to do. And I've now encountered other projects that are doing mass archiving of the internet, and they organize in this different sort of database oriented format. Yeah, so it's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you, and I agree on that notion, and I think I would not really be interested in doing a whole lot with Walk, honestly, if I thought it was just about performance and IA wasn't able to like keep up with us or whatever. It's that we need fundamentally different things that they aren't oriented towards, and that's no negative saying anything about Wayback. Like, it provides a like unbelievably huge public service.
Don't get mad at Wayback for not doing the thing that it wasn't built to do, right?
Exactly.
And I think that what we need, but to the same token, don't build something unless it's going to deliver for you some capability that you feel that you need and are currently lacking. And I think this like capacity to do query-based analysis is not QUERY, is a really important sort of side of this that we're missing.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say is the thing with Badger is Badger seems like a good place to start because it's super straightforward. I think what's going to happen is pretty soon we're going to scale out of what's feasible with Badger. So I think it's going to be something like Badger, Postgres, Cassandra, or some other madness like Hadoop in the
to me, this reeks of Postgres. This feels like a Postgres, like clean and clear, obvious answer. Yeah, and I think Postgres will work, particularly if we silo it based on project, right? Like web monitoring EPA, Postgres database, web monitoring Sweden, Postgres database, right? And just like sharding along domains is a natural fit, I think. And if you can shard along domains, we're in a really, really good position for stuff.
I think domain sharding, like if you're going to shard somewhere, that's probably the right place. And so I think that's good, and that totally fits with our like the right way to think about the data canonically is not like per crawl, even though we want that information. It's about like time, so we shouldn't segment time. On the flip side, I think the hard part of that decision will be deciding whether we should actually segment on domain or on second level domain, because there's a lot of like with the NOAA thing, right? There's a lot of interplay between things lower than second level or higher than whatever, third, fourth, fifth. So it might be that the right place is second level domain. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think we can cross that bridge if we ever get to it. But this sounds like more justification for revisiting this stuff. And I'm going to take this as a vote for like a little experimentation and see if we can. But I do think this subtly moves the ball in a very important way, which is just, okay, great. Recording redirects is very important, but like, can we make sure that there's something queryable? And if there is something queryable, can we hand that to Eric and co and say, does this actually present you with a new avenue of interest? Can you get something new and meaningful out of this? And if that's the case, then I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah. The other thing I want to keep in mind with this, but not worry about right now, but just keep in mind, is that a slightly higher level piece of information that probably requires some other background process calculating it in order to do it reliably. That would be super valuable to have, is a sense of when we're looking at in the metadata records. This snapshot of page X is the same as the previous so far until this snapshot. So like all these snapshots are pointing to the same same body hash, basically. Mainly because at the end of the day, that helps you roll it up and say, we still want to keep high fidelity. Like here's all the snapshots, but at the end of the day, we also really want to enable talking about change, which means talking about versions and like the points in time at which they flipped. And Versionista now that we're able to extract more crazy information from Versionista through ridiculous hijinks, sort of gives us that information, but we don't do a good job with it, and it's low fidelity, right? It just says, here's the last point in time at which I saw this version, and that keeps changing, and so we don't have a good way to deal with it versus like the opposite record, which is like, here's the last point in time at which I saw something different than this version that I've now recorded. But I don't know, because eventually this is going to have to be somewhat distributed in the scraping and crawling. I don't know if there's a way to calculate that information when we store the metadata. I think there's going to have to be some other process that comes back later at some time where we can reasonably reliably say, we're done with things from this date earlier, so now we can attach an analysis of whether it's different. But anyway, point is, I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind and think about, because I think that's an important thing that we want to be able to do. And it's slightly different, doesn't quite fit exactly with the way we're talking about modeling.
Loud and clear. I think I know how to do that in a way that'll be relatively efficient. But yeah, we'll chat about it sideband. Cool. Amazing. Okay, that's super helpful. Anything else?
Yeah, anything else? All right.
Thanks so much for listening to us blather again there. Yeah.
This is really interesting, and I believe I got the gist of everything down in the notes.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And yeah, looking forward to sort of seeing what we can do here.
Cool.
All right.
See you, RN.
See you guys. Bye.